Hello, lovelies, and welcome back to Seriously Now. I'm Lex Carline, and I hope you're having a wonderful week so far. Now, I've been a little bit stressed this week. As well as starting this podcast, I'm actually in my final year of Open Uni doing my Bachelor of Laws, and it's assessment time. Yay! This is the start of the last 6 assessments I will ever have to do. Yay! Then think I'm going to have a nice big bonfire to celebrate. It's a good way of disposing textbooks, I suppose. But what about disposing of bodies? Now, the case we're going to talk about today received notoriety not only for the number of victims or the societal status of them, but for the manner in which he disposed of them. Now, you may have guessed it by the title of the episode, but yes, he dissolved them in a bath of sulfuric acid. Now, he believed this was a foolproof way of getting rid of a body. Really? So, how did a smiling choir boy with what most presumed would be just a childhood fantasy of becoming a vampire turn into an acid bath murderer? And how did he concoct his abominable plan? Let's dive in, shall we? Born in Stamford, Lincolnshire, on the 24th of July 1909, as the only child to John and Emily Haig, was John George. A much longed-for baby, Emily was 40 when she finally realised her dream of becoming a mother. She does admit that she was severely anxious in the last 3 months of her pregnancy. We don't know what effects that would have had on the baby. Her husband had suddenly been fired from his long-standing job, and this left the family in financial dire straits, which, with an impending child, not where you want to be, is it really? And it wasn't until several months after Haig's birth that his father finally found more work, but it did mean moving the family to Outwood in Wakefield, which is West Yorkshire. Haig's parents were extremely religious and belonged to the Plymouth Brethren, which is a nonconformist Christian movement. Haig's father believed that the outside world was intrinsically evil, and it was so evil that the family needed to keep themselves as separate as possible. As such, he would encase the garden in a 10-foot or 3-metre fence to lock it out. Bet that was fun. And as a child, Haig was forbidden from playing sport or any other forms of entertainment, which was actually fine by him because he hated dirt, so silver lining, I suppose. John Sr. had a bluish blemish on his forehead, and he would actually tell his son that this was a devil's brand. And he got this devil's brand as a result of sinning in his earlier life. Oh, the wonderful things we tell our kids as parents just to try and get them to behave. So this naturally caused a young Haig to become terrified and obsessed about developing a devil's brand of his own. Understandable. And this was furthered by the fact that his father had told him his mother was an angel because she had no such mark. Unsurprisingly, I think, Haig would later admit that he suffered religious nightmares as a child. However, the time then that Haig realised he would develop no such mark, despite lying and committing other questionable behaviour, was later said to be a real turning point in his development. Kind of would be, wouldn't it? You've been told for years that this is going to happen, and I suppose it would kind of be a bit of an epiphany, like, oh, hang on a minute. Doesn't really matter what I do. I'm not going to get one of these devil brands. An intelligent boy, Haig won a scholarship to the Queen Elizabeth Grammar School, which was Wakefield's independent school for boys. And a not-so-fun fact, as well as Haig, years later, another former pupil of this school would be convicted of killing 3 women in Bradford. There was a rumour, as well, just a bit of fun here, that a long-standing teacher at the school dispelled, party pooper, that there was still a desk that Haig had scratched his name into and a caretaker would show first years, but the desk had actually been removed years before. At school, Haig was described as a brainy lad, but a bit of a loner, and with his parents' strict rules, no wonder. I mean, kids can be cruel, so as soon as they got wind of the massive fence or whatever, yeah, probably became the butt of a few jokes, because in that sense, I don't think kids have changed, nor were they any different back then. Now, realising that he could placate his parents simply by telling them what they wanted to hear, it's no surprise that Haig soon became a liar, and a good one. I mean, we all know that that's manipulation at its finest, and we all know someone like that, where their actions and their words don't line up. And Haig also developed a smart mouth. That kind of usually goes hand in hand with being a liar, doesn't it? Or at least in my experience of liars, they usually have smart mouths. It was said that Haig rarely misbehaved as a child, which, given how things were at home, that doesn't surprise me. But supposedly when he did, his mother would strike him with a hairbrush on the back of his hand. Now the bristles would draw blood, and he would lick it. He said this is where his blood craving first started, although the police theory is that he said this just to build his insanity defence. Now, one of the ways that Haig could escape his religious hell was through music. He loved music, and he even learned to play the piano at home. And once he secured a scholarship to Wakefield Cathedral, becoming a choir boy, he learned how to play the organ as well. Now, joining the choir meant that he would have to attend services 3 miles away from his house. And the cathedral was a completely different religious world to the one that he was living in at home. And so basically, he was living in 2 worlds, which I'm sure must be really difficult, as well as probably, for him in some senses, quite thrilling. Because therefore, from the ages of 10... I'm just scratching my foot. Oh, foot. So therefore, from the ages of 10 to 16, he was basically allowed to participate in the things that his parents had initially banned him from. Which has got to mess with the brain a little bit. Or, well, I'm not allowed to do this, but I can do it if. Love a loophole? Not sure it was the best thing for this kid. Because, well, obviously, naturally, he felt like he was getting away with something, which he was. And psychiatrists would later say that this was the sociopathic turning point. Yay! Haig had described how he would meditate on the image of the bleeding Christ from portraits he had seen in the cathedral, and that this adversely affected him, and was part of the reason for his bloodlust. Really? Or is this just more for your insanity plea? Because I'm not saying it didn't happen, but really? Unusually for cases like this, Haig was said to have a real affinity with animals, and he even valued them above humans. Might tend to agree with him on that one. He was allowed a pet dog and several rabbits. And by the sounds of things, he had animal friends in place of human ones. Haig would even give his food to the neighbouring dogs. Now, often in the cases of serial killers, we hear how as kids they abused animals or put hamsters in microwaves and things like that, not loved them and looked after them and, yeah, exception to the rule, I suppose. Now, Haig even made a statement to the effect of how he couldn't bear the suffering of others. Ironic. He even claimed that those that he killed didn't suffer. But what about the people left behind? They surely suffered the loss. Didn't think about that, did he? I'm trying to get into the mind of a murderer. What am I doing? When Haig left school, for a time he apprenticed at a firm of motor engineers. But, given his aversion to dirt, you won't be surprised to hear he didn't even last a year. He then went on to take jobs in advertising and insurance, but was fired at age 21 after being suspected of stealing from a cash box. Now, unrelated to his killer case, the following year, John Haig was named as a co-respondent in the divorce of racing driver Eddie Hall and his wife Evelyn. So this meant he had been cited in the case as having had an affair with the respondent, who was Evelyn Hall. Naughty boy. On the 6th of July, 1934, Haig married Beatrice Betty Hammer. She was 21. He was almost 25. Betty was described as a lively and good-time girl. Now, I don't think many of us would like to be referred to as a good-time girl. The couple barely knew each other when they got married, and obviously both sets of parents disapproved of the union. Betty herself even had reservations, but she was so impressed by Haig's manners and charm that she went ahead with the wedding. Ah, sweetheart. Despite how they felt about the swift union, Haig's parents did actually allow the couple to move in with them, and they allowed them to stay there for the duration of their marriage, which was only about 4 months. Then Haig was off to jail for fraud. Given that he didn't want to work for someone else, he just wanted to work for himself, Haig had started his own business, forging vehicle documents. Obviously, it went really well. Betty was actually pregnant at the time that Haig went into prison, and she went on to give birth to the couple's daughter whilst he was still incarcerated. She gave the child up for adoption, which must have been a horrific decision to have to make, and she left Haig. Dodged a bullet, I'd say. She did see him briefly one more time, and that was when he told her that they were never officially married because he already had a wife. Yeah, right. Now, when he was released from prison, Haig started a dry cleaning business with a friend of his, and apparently it did really well. But then tragedy struck. Haig's partner was killed in a road accident, and as such, the business collapsed. So then he decided he'd move to London, and this is 1936, where he got a job as a chauffeur to William McSwan, also known as Mac. And Mac was a rich amusement park owner. The two actually became really good friends, and Mac was said to be absolutely devastated when Haig left to go and pursue business for himself. Now, this time, Haig's business venture was to set himself up as a bogus solicitor. Naturally, he was caught. Shocker. And in November 1937, he received a 4-year stretch for his troubles. He was released, however, in August 1940, which was just a year into World War II. He wasn't free for long, though, and part of me wonders whether that was a ploy to avoid being called up, but that's just speculation. But he was back inside within a year, this time 21 months for stealing. Clearly, Haig was not a man concerned with making an honest living. He just wanted money. Now, it was during this most recent stint in prison that Haig came up with his grotesque version of the perfect murder. He believed dissolving the body in acid, which he practiced with mice. Poor mice. He found that they only took 30 minutes to disappear. I have a couple of questions about this. He's in prison, and how the frig did he get his hands on acid? I mean, there were probably mice running around because I can't imagine it was the cleanest and tidiest back then. But, yeah, how did he practice this in prison? There may well be a really simple answer. If somebody spots it, let me know. Thank you. After his release in 1943, Haig became a salesman for a Crawley firm, only holding on to this job for about a year. He stayed with the Stevens family and struck up a close relationship with one of the daughters, Barbara, even though she was nearly 2 decades younger than him. Bless her, she genuinely believed that, even though he was still legally married to Betty, that she would be the next Mrs. Haig. Please dream bigger. Bless her. I suppose she was young. That same year, Haig was involved in a car accident, and this would leave him with a gaping wound to his head that then dripped blood into his mouth. Yummy. He later referred to this as the catalyst that resurfaced his blood-filled nightmares. Shortly after the incident is when Haig rented his first workshop on 79 Gloucester Road, Kensington, which, randomly, is now a KFC. Because I'm sure you were all wondering. In 1944, Haig bumped back into Mac, and they struck their friendship back up. Mac even introduced Haig to his parents, and they thought he was wonderful. But Mac made the mistake of informing Haig that his parents had just invested in property. Haig's eyes must have seen pound signs, especially as he was struggling financially. Their friendship went well until the 9th of September. The two men went for a drink at the Goat in Kensington High Street. Leaving there, the two went back to Haig's workshop. Now, Haig would say in his diary that he was suddenly overcome with a need for blood, so he hit Mac over the head with a blunt instrument, and then slit his throat. That's how he treats his friends. Haig said he took a mug from the side, collected some blood, and drank it. Gross. Afterwards, he put Mac's body into a 40-gallon drum and poured concentrated sulfuric acid on top. He said that whilst he was pouring the acid in, the fumes overcame him and that he had to step outside. Oh, Diddums, you poor man. Ugh. He then went back in to cover the drum and went home to sleep, whilst his former friend and boss literally turned into human soup. What a lovely friend. Haig said that night he suffered from more blood-filled surreal nightmares. We're sure it wasn't just a hint of your guilt, sir? 2 days after the murder, Haig went and poured the remains of poor old Mac down a manhole. What a way to go out. Unfortunately, this is not the end. And so, to be more prepared for the next murder, Haig added some supplies to his dungeon of death, such as a stirrup pump, which, thank you Google, is a portable water pump, and some homemade tin face masks, presumably to help him not become overwhelmed with the fumes. Naturally, Mr. and Mrs. McSwan wondered where their son had gone. And as Haig had such a trusted friendship with Mac's parents, when he told them that Mac had actually fled to Scotland to avoid being called up for military service, remember World War II, they believed him. They drank the Kool-Aid. Haig took control of Mac's house, and he managed to keep up the lie until July 1945. And obviously with the war coming to an end, the couple wondered why their son hadn't returned yet. 'Cause I'm sorry, but he never will. On July the 2nd, 1945, Haig lured the couple to Gloucester Road, where they sadly met the same fate as their son, including supposedly having their blood drunk. Haig told the couple's housekeeper that they had gone to America. He forwarded their mail to his, Mac's house, and even forged Mac's signature on a power of attorney. In total, Haig stole the McSwans' pension checks and sold their properties, pocketing around £4,000, which today would be just over £68,000. After cashing in, Haig stayed in Kensington, but moved into the Onslow Court Hotel. Fast forward another couple of years and Haig was running out of money. Again. That gambling addiction isn't going to help things. And so, Haig found another couple to assist him with his problem. This time, the innocent couple were Dr. Archibald Henderson and his wife Rose, and Haig met them by pretending to be interested in some property that they were selling. By this point, Haig had moved his workshop of horrors from Kensington to Leopold Road in Crawley. And on the 12th of February 1948, Haig drove Dr. Henderson from his home, the Metropole Hotel in Brighton, to Crawley, under the guise of showing him an invention. Because all of a sudden now, he's an inventor, as well as a lawyer, and yeah. Once at the workshop, Haig shot Dr. Henderson, with his own gun, nonetheless, that he'd stolen from their house. He then managed to lure Mrs. Henderson there by telling her that her husband had fallen ill, and so poor Mrs. Henderson rushed off to go and see if her darling husband was all right, and Haig shot her as well. He also claimed once again that he had drunk their blood too. Then can you guess what he did? Yep, into the drums they went for dissolving. Oof. I'm normally quite good with things like this, but actually saying all this out loud is making me feel a little queasy today. How are you guys doing? And yet Haig got away with it again, for now. He forged a letter from the couple and sold all their possessions. Could you imagine doing that today? Such different times. This time he earned himself around £8,000, or in today's money it would be just over 100,000. He didn't get rid of all of the Hendersons' possessions though, and there was one that he did actually retain. Remember his affinity to animals? That's right. Haig kept the Hendersons' dog. Lucky pupper. But, unlike the McSwans, this time not everything had dissolved, and Dr. Henderson's left foot, or part of it, remained. Haig, completely unbothered and at this point feeling immune to being captured, dumped the remains in the corner of his yard, foot and all, and even gave his girlfriend Barbara some of Mrs. Henderson's clothes. Yes, that's right, Barb's still hanging around. Mrs. Henderson's brother, though, Berlin, was prepared to go to the police about the sudden disappearance of his sister and her husband because it was completely out of character and unlike them. But that was until Haig got in his ear and convinced him that the couple had actually fled to South Africa because Dr. Henderson had carried out an illegal abortion. And the brother bought it. Does that tell us something about the doctor? Speculation, purely. So, in June 1948, Haig claimed that his car had been stolen, and the Lagonda, which was a luxury car brand at the time, was found, but it was wrecked at the bottom of a cliff. Now, weirdly, police also found an unidentified body nearby, but Haig was ruled to have nothing to do with it. And it's something that he always maintained as well, that he was absolutely nothing to do with this random body, which I'm inclined to believe him on this one as well, because he seemed more than happy, which happy might be the wrong word, but I hope you know what I'm trying to get at. But yeah, more than happy to divulge his sordid details when he was cornered, and even potentially fabricated some more. So if he was involved, why not fess up? Although I'm trying to understand the mind of a murderer again, so maybe I should stop that. February 1949, and Haig had been living at the Onslow Hotel for 4 years. And another one of his fellow occupants was 69-year-old Henrietta Helen Olivia Robarts Durand Deacon, known as Olive. What a name. Now, Olive had lived at the hotel for 6 years, and the two had often exchanged pleasantries at mealtimes, but there was nothing to point that their relationship at this point was any more than that. Just the same as he told the Hendersons, Haig told Olive that he was an engineer and inventor. So, lunchtime on Valentine's Day 1949, 14th of February, Olive had some false nails that she'd been designing, and she asked Haig to have a look at them to see if he could make them more marketable. The cretin agreed, clearly seeing an opportunity. Just 4 days later, Haig drove Olive out to his workshop, and once again with the Hendersons' gun, he shot Olive in the back of the head. Now, it does seem that none of them saw him coming, that it was always the back of the head, which, I suppose for them, would be a bonus. I don't know if I was the victim, if I'd want to see it coming, or if I'd just want to be bam out, gone done. Probably bam out, gone done. Haig removed Olive's jewellery and her fur coat and stuck her body in a 45-gallon corrosion-resistive drum and filled it up with sulphuric acid. And more human soup. Poor Olive. The disgusting human. I'm sorry, but I've got to call him that. He's admitted to all of this. It's fine. Casually went back to the Onslow Court Hotel and ate a 3-course dinner. And it was around this time that Mrs. Henderson's brother, Berlin, had actually begun pushing police again to investigate his sister's disappearance, because he was no longer buying the South Africa story. So Haig thought he was going to have to silence him too. But this time Haig's luck would run out before he could commit any more crimes. Woohoo! So, from breakfast the day after Olive's murder, other hotel residents were concerned about her whereabouts. Naturally, they asked Haig if he knew anything. Obviously he lied, and he said that he'd arranged to meet her, but she'd just never turned up. By the Sunday, the other residents knew something was obviously very wrong, and one in particular was Constance Lane. She was the one who'd previously spoken to Haig, and so he then went to her to ask if they'd heard anything yet. Trying to play it. Mrs. Lane said that no, she'd heard nothing, and that she actually intended to go to the police that very afternoon. Can you guess what Haig did? Yeah, he accompanied her to the police station to play the concerned neighbour. Not sure if neighbour's the right word, but... Sergeant Alexandra Lambourne of Chelsea Police was suspicious of Haig from the start. Yes! As it was a Sunday, there wasn't really much that could be done, so they had to wait until Scotland Yard's records office opened on the Monday, and this is when Haig's criminal record was exposed. That same Monday morning, Haig drove off to his workshop, la-di-da-di-da, emptied the acidic sludgy remains from the drum, as he'd done many times before, just dumped it onto the ground outside, and then drove to Horsham and had Olive's jewellery valued. By the time he returned to the hotel, there was a police car waiting for him. Now, Haig reiterated the story about how Olive had missed their appointment, and the police just went away. However, a few days later, they were back and wanting another statement from Haig. For the most part, his statement was the same, but the police still weren't convinced. On Saturday the 26th of February, the police took a visit to Haig's workshop. The door to the workshop was forced, and Sergeant Heslin noted a rubber apron, gas mask, coat, and empty drums that had contained sulphuric acid. Dun dun dun. Animal fat and sulphuric acid are found on the gloves, drums, and coat, with human blood later found on the gas mask case and apron. Sergeant Heslin also found papers that referred to other missing persons, a container with a recently fired revolver and 8 further rounds. There was also an attaché case, which is a posher version of a briefcase basically, and this had a receipt for a Persian lamb coat from a cleaner in Reigate. So the next day, police retrieved the coat from the cleaners, and at 4:15 p.m, Detective Inspector Albert Webb was waiting at the hotel for Haig. Haig was driven back to Chelsea Police Department under the guise of assisting with the ongoing inquiries. Later that night, clearly confident that he'd committed the perfect murder, Haig confessed to D.I. Webb, "I've destroyed her with acid. You'll find the sludge that remains at Leopold Road, but every trace is gone. How can you prove a murder if there's no body?" Granted the lack of forensic technology, etc., it would have been harder than today, but a good start is the fact that you've just admitted it to a detective. And clearly, Haig completely misunderstood the concept of corpus delicti, thinking that if there's no body, he couldn't be convicted with murder, when in actuality, it's the principle that a crime must be proved to have occurred before a person can be convicted of committing that crime. Knew that law degree was going to come in handy. And during the questioning, Haig actually had the gall to ask D.I. Webb, "Tell me frankly, what are the chances of someone being released from Broadmoor?" Really thinks he's going to get away with that insanity plea. D.I. Webb said he couldn't discuss that sort of thing, to which Haig retorted, "Well, if I told you the truth, you would not believe me. It sounds too fantastic to believe." I'm not sure fantastic is the right word, but okay. Tuesday the 1st of March, 1949, and Chief Inspector Mahone goes to Crawley to take charge. He'd also found in Haig's hotel room a shopping list itemising some of the things in the workshop, and there was also a shirt with a blood-stained cuff. So, in the yard outside the workshop, the police found the acidic sludge exactly where Haig said it was going to be. The ground was an absolute mess, covered in not only sludge, but piles of rubbish too. Luckily, the eagle-eyed pathologist, Dr. Keith Simpson, spotted something among all the mess. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like a stone. A stone it was, from a gallbladder. A human gallbladder. Also undissolved in the sludge were specimens of human bone. Remember, Dr. Henderson's foot hadn't fully melted, and Haig had just chucked that out on the yard as well. After all the sludge was carefully sifted, which took days, the pathology team retrieved, are you ready for this, 28 pounds of human body fat, 3 human gallstones, part of a left foot, 18 fragments of human bones, fully intact upper and lower dentures, which Olive's dentist confirmed were hers, the handle of a red plastic bag, and a lipstick container. On Friday, March the 2nd, Mahone finds a blood-stained penknife in a cubby in Haig's car, and Haig is officially arrested for Olive's murder. Now, Haig made a written confession, and it was at this time that he also added the 3 McSwans and the Hendersons to his confession list, claiming he killed them all so he could accomplish his childhood dream of drinking blood. And as well as confessing to the 6 murders, Haig also confessed to another 3. There was a young man called Max, a girl from Eastbourne, and a woman from Hammersmith. Police actually think that Haig fabricated these 3 to further his efforts to try and secure that insanity plea. And I tend to agree with them. I mean, you look at the detail he could give from the murders we know he committed, these just seem far too vague to fit the MO. I can't say for definite that he didn't, it just seems unlikely. Now, whilst he was in prison for the last time, Haig did actually receive some visitors. His parents continued to visit him, and also his girlfriend Barbara. Now, Barbara wanted to know who the person she'd fallen in love with actually was, and did he intend to kill her too? Which, fair questions. He denied that he ever would have done that, but I think she realised pretty quickly that if she'd become an inconvenience, she probably would have met the same fate, and that she'd had a really lucky escape. Now remember, she's 20 years younger than him, so still very young and still has plenty of life left to live, and hopefully went on to live it well. Whilst in prison, Haig was examined by a team of doctors and psychologists. Obviously, he tried to persuade them that, with his obsession with drinking blood and the bizarre dreams, that this meant that he was a lunatic. None of them bought it. Well done. Instead, they believed Haig as a child had developed a paranoid personality to escape his parents' suffocating behaviour and emotional pain, and this upbringing had contributed to a mental state where dividing the lines of fantasy and reality had blurred. They believed Haig thought that he was above the law, which was kind of stating the obvious, whereas he was in fact an egocentric paranoiac who knows that killing people is wrong and against the law, but still wrongly thought it was part of fulfilling his destiny. Now, what the psychiatrists didn't know, and although I'd heard of this case, neither did I until I started really digging, was that Haig had actually, in his earlier life, developed a friendship with an employee at Sussex Psychiatric Hospital. And to this friend, surprise, surprise, Haig showed a keen interest in mental health disorders. He also possessed a talent for deception. As we've seen, remember he posed as various things to entrap his victims, including an engineer and a lawyer. He was just an all-round devious person. And whilst the prosecution was ready to go to trial within a month, Haig's trial finally began on the 18th of July 1949 and concluded the following afternoon. Attorney General Sir Hartley Shawcross, later Lord Shawcross, urged the jury to reject Haig's insanity plea because he acted with malice aforethought, meaning he had the intention to kill or harm. The jury took just 17 minutes to find him guilty. Haig was sentenced to death and hanged on the 10th of August 1949 by Chief Executioner Albert Pierrepoint. Reportedly, whilst in his cell, this makes me laugh, I'm sorry, Haig asked jailer Jack Morwood whether it was possible to have a trial run of his hanging. I'm sorry, what? What? He wanted to make sure that it would all run smoothly. Ugh. It was likely his request went no further, and if it did, it was denied. But really? Before he was executed, Haig had agreed to model for a death mask for Madame Tussauds, the famous waxworks. He even left his clothes to them. But it was with the stipulation that his waxwork was always kept in spotless condition. Remember, he hated dirt. And this meant trousers pressed, his shirt cuffs showing, and his hair parted. Yes, boss. Now, he has been compared to French serial killer Marcel Petiot? Anyway, a medical doctor who preyed on Jewish refugees during World War II. And he was convicted after the remains of 23 people were found in his basement. Could cover him at some point if you like, let me know. It is also possible that the whole acid bath idea wasn't Haig's own creation. Could you imagine? It's entirely possible that he'd read about another Frenchman, Georges Serrajani, who was a Marseille lawyer who used similar methods to destroy victims in 1925. Now, in 2002, Martin Clunes and Keely Hawes starred in A is for Acid, an ITV movie. This was based on Haig. And there's even a video game character, Kuroda, from Clock Tower 3, who was based on Haig. Haig was said to show no remorse and even revelled in the grisly recounts of his crimes in the papers. So he would surely be thrilled with a movie and a video game character so many years after his execution. Ugh. But thankfully, that brings us to the end of the acid bath murderer, and today's episode, not so thankfully. If you made it to the end, thank you so much. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe because it really, really helps, so thank you in advance for that. As always, you can find me on the socials at Seriously Now Pod, and for your feedback, content ideas and seriously used stories, or just general business inquiries, it's seriouslynowpod@gmail.com. So until next time, stay safe, stay free, and stay weird. Bye-bye.